Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm a bit busy lately, but I thought it would be good to continue on with my series on the 8 functions in 8 positions, and today we are discussing introverted sensing. First of all, before I start, I feel like I should say that SI is not really about memory. I mean, it could extend to how you experience memory, but at the end of the day, memory is a universal biological process, and it's not just like SI is good memory, no SI is bad memory. I would say that SI has more to do with how much or how likely you are to refer back to your past sensory internal database of information. Alright, so with that out of the way, let us just start. For dominant SI, these people, they notice detailed characteristics of sensory objects and experiences, their similarities and differences to comparable sensory experiences in the past. So they're always comparing. They tend to perceive all sensory experiences as interconnected instead of discrete. So I know that when I say that, a lot of people probably think of NI, and that is understandable, but for NI, what they're interconnecting is the concepts, like the internal concepts and understandings. But SI is the one that interconnects all sorts of sensory information throughout the past. So I'll give you an example. When I started this channel, I had a friend who's ISTJ, and he was immediately like, oh, it's probably not going to be successful because other MBTI channels aren't successful. Okay, by the way, I think his idea of success is like 1 million subscribers. So basically this is to illustrate that like he didn't take me starting this channel, which is a physical sensory thing, he didn't take it as a one-off fresh experience by its own, which is what, by the way, SE would do. SE treats all sorts of sensory endeavors and sensory experiences as its new own thing. But he was immediately comparing, this new thing with past similar things, which is, in his case, all the other MBTI channels that he knows that has not 1 million subscribers. Alright, moving on to the auxiliary SI users. These people take conscious effort to notice detailed sensory characteristics and compare them to the past sensory experiences. They tend to sift through their storehouse of concrete recollections and perceptions when the effort would aid the application of their JE. So that would be their FE or TE. Yeah, so unlike, the automatic response of the ISTJ, the ESXJs, they're not in that mode of constantly looking at their internal storage all the time, because they're extroverts, or they're sifting through between their TE and NE, or like they're very outward bound. So they only look inwards occasionally, and that's usually to do like their JE thing. So I guess for the ESFJ, a stereotypical, situation would be they go to a party and they want to help their FE, so they're looking into their SI for past situations about their friends, and then they could ask their friends about, how did your exam go, etc. And then for ESTJ, I guess if they're trying to set up a business, for example, maybe they would look at past businesses that were similar to help with their TE. But those are just stereotypical examples. Any type can do anything. ESFJ could try to set up a business and be more FE oriented. And the TE user might, be trying to relate to other people, but do it in a more TE way. So maybe more on that later. But for now, let's move on to the tertiary function. These people may not notice the bulk of how detailed sensory characteristics compare to past sensory experiences, but they tend to value precision and sensory predictability, perhaps in the form of routine, organization, or sufficient notice when it comes to sensory activities. So I definitely relate to this one a lot. What I mean by not noticing, obviously we're not really the most sensorially observant people. Like if you remove a little thing in my bedroom, I probably won't notice it for a while. But I do value I do value some sort of sensory predictability. I think a lot of young INTP, INFPs, we are really fighting against routine because of our NE, but I think as we get older, we value some of that. Maybe we never really want to have a routine, but we might just value a notice. Like I want to have a notice before we do something sensory, especially if it's like a new sensory thing. If it's an older sensory thing that I've experienced many times before, like going to a cafe, then it's, I guess, fine. Okay, they tend to be adept at recalling detailed memories and connections surrounding a sensory experience with the help of their complex internal evaluative framework, that's their TI or FI, though their conceptually exploratory nature tends to be more externally evident than their attachment to their subjective past. Moving on to the inferior SI people, this is really interesting. These people are so fun. So they might not notice the bulk of how sensory characteristics compare to the past, which can lead to constantly pursuing the new without recalling how this may impact them concretely. For example, in health or finances, especially when the conceptual possibilities are too enticing. So I see this all the time with my dominant NE friends and acquaintances. They really have tried so much in their lives, which is like really amazing. They are not really taking care of their SI, so they're not checking in with their internal bodily feelings. They're not checking in with, if I do this crazy thing and stay up until 5 a.m. in the past, that has made me really sleepy, so maybe I shouldn't do that. But they don't check in with that, so a lot of them that I know, they even might hurt themselves but not really notice. Like they get injured, but they just push forward and keep going. Yeah, so this tends to result in like very varied experiences that are really across the spectrum and not having like any sort of set routine, not even like a bedtime or something. Okay, they may overcompensate by doubling down on the few sensory experiences that they have repeatedly internalized. So they don't have a lot of hard sensory associations because of low SI, but then the ones that they do have, I guess through constant repetition, they're very, very adamant about. So I wrote, for example, insisting that certain foods should never be eaten with other foods, or that they should get a handwritten birthday card every year. Now moving on to the fifth position, or people with dominant SE. So as dominant sensors, they do notice how detailed sensory characteristics compare to past sensory experiences, but they tend to prefer to ignore that for the sake of exploring an abundance of entirely new sensory experiences in the present moment. This leads some to see them as careless and hedonistic. Yeah, okay, so they tend to dislike what they perceive to be the boredom of sticking with only the sensory experiences that are deemed safe enough or good enough through trial and error and experience. Now moving on to the sixth position, which is people with auxiliary SE. These people also, as high sensors, they do notice how detailed sensory characteristics compare to those of the past, but they often use this ability to their advantage, unlike the people with dominant SE. Whether that's to improve the precision of their inner framework, so that would once again be TI or FI, or to ground their NI. So also, I feel like it's necessary to point out that, their JI and NI together, they're both introverted, so when they're hopping between those, their SE, by default is going to look more introverted and maybe more SI-like because there's so much introversion. Their FI or TI is informing their SE and their NI is informing their SE, etc. Okay, so they can be quite adept at following the detailed steps of a concrete procedure through a combination of kind of functions, JI and NI, but they ultimately prioritize the diverse sensory opportunities of the present moment. Now moving on to the seventh position, which is people with tertiary SE. So they do not notice how detailed sensory characteristics compare to the past, such that they often have trouble recalling past sensory experiences, especially when focused on future visions, leading some people to see them as vague and forgetful. Okay, this is kind of interesting. So it's kind of like if you ask them how was the party that they went to last Thursday, they will probably say like, oh, I kind of didn't like it. So that's their NI intuitive inkling or intuitive conclusion. So they'll remember the conclusions, but not necessarily the parts that contributed to that conclusion. So then you ask, okay, why didn't you enjoy the party? And they'll say like, oh, I don't know, I just didn't like it. But there was probably a lot of sensory details that went towards that conclusion. For example, maybe the lighting was kind of stroby and they didn't like that like flickering light, or maybe the music wasn't exactly to their taste. Maybe they didn't know that many people and people weren't very friendly and accommodating. So like the many sensory characteristics, they're probably going to forget and crystallize all of that into like one conclusion. So they tend to have trouble perceiving connections between detailed sensory information over time, instead emphasizing the current concrete context, leading some to see them as haphazard. Okay, so yeah, these people are not really the ones to learn from past experiences. They don't really like to refer too much to concrete past experiences. They're more likely to be like, well, this is how things are right now, and this is how they could be or most likely will be in the future. So it's kind of like a flaw and benefit in one, because they might not learn from the past, but also they're not restricted or confined by the past. All right, last but not least, the 8th position, or people with inferior SE. These people, also they don't notice how detailed sensory characteristics compare to the past, but often seem to make up for it through their deep and holistic inner repository of conceptual understanding. So that's their NI. This perhaps prompts them to display vague but profound insights into certain topics, prompting some people to see them as thorough and knowledgeable. Yeah, so ironically, that can look very much like SI. So NI users are very thorough they're very thorough on giving the context. So while they're giving like the entire context of something, this can be mistaken for being detail oriented like SI. But they might give details surrounding the context, but their view or their focus is not on the details, it's on the whole. And it's like always on the whole. So they do not perceive the detailed sensory recollections of a topic, but its conceptual core, which they can support with present concrete examples. So, depending on the person, if they give a lot of concrete examples in the present moment, that might actually look kind of SI. It might look kind of detailed, but they're just giving a lot of examples to substantiate their NI idea. All right, that is it for SI. I hope that was helpful in typing yourself and others. If you would like me to personally type you, I do offer that typing service on my website, kind of 8.com. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.